Can Marlene hear us? Can you hear us, Marlene? Perfect, thanks. Excellent. Kia ora tātou. Welcome to everybody this morning to the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting on 23rd of April 2024. I would like to ask Marlene McDonald to open the meeting with a karakia. Oh, Marlene's frozen. Amen. Thank you, Marlene. We do not have anybody for public forum, so we move straight on to apologies. We have 4 apologies. We have Councillor Wiley, Houlihan and Barker, and Donna Matahari Atariki is also an apology. I move that they be accepted. Seconded. Councillor Lucas. All those in favour? Carried. Confirmation of the agenda. I move that the agenda be confirmed and without additional alteration. Seconded. Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Carried. Declarations of interest. I move that. Does anybody have any declarations of interest they wish to change? Therefore, I move that the committee confirms the proposed management plan for elected or independent members' interests. Seconded. Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Carried. 6 minutes of the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting 13th of February 2024. I move that the committee confirms the minutes of the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting held on the 13th of February 2024 as correct record. Seconded. Councillor Weatherall. All those in favour? Any matters arising from those minutes? No. Carry on. Very good. Part A reports. Actions from resolutions of Infrastructure Services Committee meetings on page 23. Councillor Gary.
Kia ora, Mr Chair. I just want clarification. I noticed the first one up has council underneath the date. Am I assuming from that resolutions that have been passed at council but apply to infrastructure are put in here? Is that the case? And I have a subsequent question that's related to that. Just wanted clarification on that.
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, I would say that's what's happened here.
So, in that regard, there are two that are missing from here that are still open. One from the annual plan last year around the Peninsula Connection. It was on there, either Council or Infrastructure Services. I haven't been able to find it, but I know it was there. And then the one from this annual plan, both of which are still open. There's some aspects of them that have been completed, but most of it have not. So can we make sure that those go on, either ISCOM or Council, whichever is appropriate? But it would seem to me, if we're following that practice, that it would be here. Thank you.
It's actually been my observation too that things seem to go off this list every once in a while and without any real particular explanation. So I think if something does come off the list, I'd like an explanation as to why it's been removed. If it's been completed, then that would be the appropriate explanation. But if not, then I'd be liking it to stay on. Thank you. Any other questions? That's no? Is that a no? Are you looking for something, Mr. Yes. Yep, okay, I'll wait.
We have a question down here.
Microphone.
15th the 8th, item number 2. Midterm DCC recommended a bus loop be included. Has that been included in the RLTP?
Yeah, that has been included in the midterm review of the RLTP.
Thank you.
Cool, is that it for questions? I actually have a question for Mr. McLean, which is not entirely on this, but it's more on the agenda itself. When I look at the agenda, I don't have any activity reports from any department of infrastructure. Is that correct? I mean, we've got the parking, we've got the submission to the government, and a few other things, but we don't have activity reports.
Thanks, Mr Chairman. There are no activity reports on this agenda, but we will look to bring update and activity reports to future committees.
Okay, so I'm actually going to move then on this that and I'll look to Councillor Weatherall to second me on this, that activity reports be included in the next Infrastructure Services Committee meeting. Carried. Seconded, Councillor Weatherall. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Okay, so that's just to make sure that we get them on the next term. Thank you. Okay, now to this item.
Excuse me, sorry, just a point of process. Did you say Councillor Weatherall was seconding you on that? And, I didn't realise he's available up there, pardon me.
He's just right there.
Oh, I was missing you. Pardon me.
Not upheld, Dan. Okay, so back to the main item. I move that the committee notes the open attachments for resolutions and Infrastructure Service Committee meeting shown in attachment A. Seconded. Councillor Weatherall. All those in favour? Carried. Item 8, forward work programme. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My recidivist question on public toilets, and it's Mr. Ward. Yep, you're behind the Mr. Ward. Page 28, and obviously the St Leonard's toilet, and just that continuing, slightly frustrating conversation that seems to be going on about getting that established. I think it says work is commencing with key roles to confirm the location. I thought we knew the location. So basically, where do we sit with that development, and can we be assured that the current two portaloos that are currently based at Pride's Corner, sorry for those people who don't know the West Harbour, will remain until that toilet eventually at some point appears?
I'll get that. Thanks, Councillor. Mr. West is away today, so I'll field that. So the discussions are ongoing with Kiwi Rail. So yes, and I'll talk with the property team about ensuring the portaloos remain in place. But yeah, those discussions are definitely ongoing with Kiwi Rail.
Yeah, and I mean, no disrespect, thank you for that answer. And we've had this conversation multiple times, and that's the answer we get. It's ongoing. And I'm probably going to, I'm speaking through you, Mandy. It would be good if the West Harbour Community Board was availed of this information. Well, so why is that not coming to us other than just ongoing? Because ongoing is ongoing, but this is the answer we get continuously. I mean, you can feel my frustration that there doesn't seem to be any practical progress beyond the conversation that goes on ad infinitum.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, so that's staff, DCC staff are driving it pretty hard. That I can confirm that.
Okay, so reading between the lines there, the sticking point here perhaps might be another organisation beginning with K. Okay, Mr. Chair, I just want to put on record my frustration with this. It is, either we're getting something or we're not, and ongoing is a word that is used as a polite way of saying no.
I guess, Councillor Walker, I guess that's actually the purpose of my resolution about activity reports, is that we're looking for maybe greater detail in some of this than ongoing. Then we'd know exactly where we stood from a governor's position.
Yeah, and I think in terms of not patronising the public, I don't think the public would be uncomfortable with a no, but I think we should be transparent and upfront about what's happening. And if it's going to take 4 years, tell the public it's 4 years. Just don't keep saying it's ongoing.
Okay, that's also speeches at this point, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
But I'm frustrated.
Okay, Councillor Lucas.
Keeping on the toilet thing, Outram Glen toilets, and it says here scheduled to begin in June 2024, and we seem to have, at the community board, had mixed messages about when the toilet was actually going to begin construction. So I'm just wondering, actually, is there any is it actually going to start in June 24?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, the information I have is it will. The toilet itself is constructed, essentially sitting on the back of the truck, but the staff were working through land tenure issues, and now it's ground preparation. So the information I have is it's on track for June.
Thank you for that. And the Mosgiel Park and Ride, I see that's out for tenders, or tenders documents are being prepared for the 2024-25 construction season. I'm just wondering when that might be realistically up and running.
So at the moment, Council, we've got that in the plan. Our plan was to actually get the tender documents ready to go out to tender the beginning of next financial year, which is with the winter, with the desired outcome to build it in the summer season, and have it up and running before the end of the financial year. We are keeping a very close eye on the Mosgiel direct bus. And so we're just keeping a watching brief on that.
Any more questions? Councillor Gilbert.
Heading back to what started with Steve's toilet, it's Kiwi Rail, basically, and my perception may not be accurate, but it is my perception, ergo my reality. Every time I hear Kiwi Rail being mentioned, our relationship, I'm curious what our relationship is with them. Is it strong? Is it strained? Is it distant? Is it amicable? Is it because each time I hear of anything we're trying to do with Kiwi Rail, there's a struggle, whether it's toilets, whether it's access to cruise ships, whatever it may be. So I'm trying to understand what our relationship is with Kiwi Rail.
Thanks, Councillor. It's too difficult to answer, really, because we deal with them at all different levels and different departments. So I can't give you that answer at the moment. But it's a large organisation, and sometimes it takes some time to get through to the people that you need to talk to.
Councillor Mayhem.
On the subject of toilets again, I feel that one of the options for St Leonard's was a toilet like Outram Glen that is self-contained and emptyable rather than trying to complicate it with the plumbing and things. Is that right, Mr Ward? This is going back quite a ways now.
Kia ora, Councillor. Yes, certainly that was one of the options that was being investigated. I can't say today what the status of that particular option is. I can get back to you.
Would that simplify things with Kiwi Rail if we weren't looking to plumb it across the State 88, Highway 88?
So property and managing that process, I'd have to ask Ms Nilsson when she's back from leave on that.
And one more question about coastal management options. I see groins mentioned in there under the 10-year plan. Aramoana has 2 groins that the Aramoana League residents have campaigned the West Harbour Community Board repeatedly about the groins at Aramoana that will protect some of the sand spit there. Is there an Aramoana groin in the 10-year plan? Or the coastal management plan, sorry, options?
Not to my knowledge. I'm just trying to think of my time in parks. You may be referring to the Pilot's Wharf at Aramoana?
Is that right, Claire? It's called Long... There's 2 groins, and I can't remember their names.
If I can help, we've got the board got some information from the League, which I'll forward to make sure that you get that, so we can check that up and get back to you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Lucas.
Just on the last item on page 31, on the speed management plan, and the hearings are currently adjourned, I'm fielding significant number of questions in respect to Rickerton Road in particular, and a lot of other questions about people who submitted to that speed management plan, and just wondering at what point, and I do know there is issues with the government, just when there might be a decision on some of those issues.
I'm actually meeting with Ms Benson straight after this meeting to talk about that very point.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any more questions? Okay. Anybody want to speak? I'm just going to move it then. I move the committee Notes Infrastructure Service Work Programme is shown in Attachment A. Any speakers? Councillor Walker. Councillor Mayhem.
Yeah, thank you. I will, and forgive me.
I'll second it by Councillor Mayhem.
Yep, and forgive me earlier for trailing into conversation. I'll use that opportunity now. So I'll just go back. What I said badly during questioning around the toilet at St Leonard's, and simply, basically, what has happened here is we've built a wonderful asset, and as part of that wonderful asset, we promised the communities along that stretch of our harbour that there would be the suggestion that when the path was completed there would be a toilet there, which I think I felt was necessary. But now it's open, and this, whether we like it or not, this asset is fantastically well used. It is absolutely chocker at the weekend and often during the week. And I've often mentioned around this table the issues surrounding dog poo. We're now getting into another scenario where we're having a problem with humans, because whether you like it or not, and you're on that path with a family of 6, 4 of whom are children who are under a certain age and they want to take a pee or a number 2, they're going to do it, and there just simply ain't anywhere to do it other than a couple of pretty crappy portaloos at the moment. And I'm thankful we've got them, but a lot of people are reticent to use them. If you go along that way, take a wee look inside one. It's pretty much in the area, we're close to an area where we promised to have this toilet. And I may have unfairly thrown Kiwi Rail under the bus, because I know this is a complicated situation, but ultimately the public doesn't care about how complicated this is. It just wants a facility it can use. It doesn't care about the politics that lie behind this. I know it's related to SH88. I know it's related to plumbing, so it has a 3 waters issue. It has multiple issues, but as I've said in my questioning, let's just be honest with the public. Instead of telling them it's imminent, we're working on it, can we just try and get a clear answer? Because this is what I do personally when I get hit up in the public. I don't dangle a promise in front of people. I try and find out what's real and pass that information on. And I think we'd sit better as a council if we were honest about this situation. If it's going to take a year, tell the public, because I personally am sick to the back teeth of telling people it's imminent. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Benson-Pope.
I'm apologising. I had a question. Will you permit one more about shaping Dunedin Transit?
Yeah, if you just write it like it's a speech, I'm more than happy to take the question.
I guess it relates to your comment about your motion about the reports. I've asked several times in the past about progress on the real-time parking information program, and I see no report here, unless I've missed it, about that work that we've been promised for far too long.
At the leave of the meeting, I'll let Ms Benson answer that if you want.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor. So we have. So I guess that it started off with the MR Cagney kind of strategic roadmap, and coming from that we have a bunch of actions that we're progressing. One is the bylaw that'll come before ISCOM in October. The real-time gantry information will be installed next financial year. And we've rolled out the licence plate recognition. There is a piece of work to do around pricing, and our intention is to get that done next year, but we can, depending on the outcome of the activity report, we can certainly provide a report.
Do you want to give a speech now?
Well, it's an extraordinarily long time since Council resolved to begin that work. Can I ask further, when can residents and drivers expect to see the guidance that we'd be hoping for nearly 2 years in place in the central city?
I think what we'll do is we'll ask for that in the activity report that we get
That's
in the
fine.
next
Thank
Infrastructure
you.
Services Committee. Thanks. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Look, I just wanted to add my comments to Councillor Walker's debate. Even though I don't live on the West Harbour, I have had multiple questions about the toilet on the West Harbour. I think it's because of the round the harbour shared path. Probably that's why I'm fielding them, but it's exactly the same question. Is there going to be one? Because people aren't sure anymore, and if so, when? So I do agree, and I do agree with Councillor Walker's comment that the public actually don't care who we have to deal with, and I appreciate for staff it's much more complicated than that, and other organisations have other priorities and regulations to navigate. So I understand these things are complex, but I do think we need to give a really clear understanding of where it stands, and it's the same with the change toilet in the city that has been held up, and I have asked that question and had those answers. It's so that the public understand why and often there's really good reason for delay. I understand it hasn't been easy, but it is frustrating when people believe an amenity is going to be, or a facility is going to be delivered, to not quite understand when. So I really encourage us as an organisation to communicate those things clearly to our public.
Any more speeches? Okay, I'm just going to comment basically on what's been said. My request for the activity reports is in fact to bring forward, in fact, what I think is a frustration around the table of we know activities are going on, but we don't really know quite what's going on, yet in fact we then end up having to interface with the public. We often become the interface, and it's hard to do so without the right information, and our role as governance is to be making sure that things are moving along. We're not an operational, but we do have a role in making sure that the operational activities that have been put forward by this group are in fact being enacted. My commentary on KiwiRail, Waka Kotahi and DOC is that they're all large organisations that are very hard to often find the centre of. But I would actually say to KiwiRail directly, you have been invited to the Regional Transport Committee meeting now probably 5 times over the last 3 years and have still not turned up. And I believe that comes from a culture of being told to separate yourself off from everybody else that happened in the 1980s. And I would like KiwiRail to look at its internal culture and recognise that in fact that it is an integral part of our transport system, and we need to actually be able to interface with it in a much more easy way than we are right now. I don't think there's bad people in KiwiRail, I just simply think that there is a different way of looking at the world. They've been told to go and sit in the corner for the last 30 years, and now we're told them to come out of the corner. Of course they're not culturally ready for it. Thank you. So I will move, we've moved it and seconded it, so I'll move, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 9, submission on fast track approvals bill. Mr. Freeland, Dr. Johnson, Mr. Ward, and Colt. I think it's so we. No, you're not coming to the table. I thought we were going to have a massive party down the end then for a second. Do you want to speak to it or take it as read?
Kira, Mr. Chair, thank you. Take it as read, but I would draw your attention, please. I would draw your attention, please, to item 2, which notes. That's what's happened. Thank you. Sorry. Didn't spot that. Yes, I would draw your attention, please, to item 2, which notes that the Environment Select Committee, the submissions closed on the 19th of April, but they noted that we were meeting today and granted an extension.
Very good. And that was why it came here and not to planning tomorrow?
Correct.
Thanks.
If I might. I'd just like to note that subsequent to this report being put on the agenda, LGNZ and Taitoa finalised their submission on this matter, and as you'll appreciate, there's been quite a lot of publicity and a lot of feedback in the media on this. Their submission is about 35 pages long. It's available on the LGNZ website. This submission in this report here is aligned to it, but theirs is much more fulsome. It's 35 pages long. It covers a lot of detail. It's a combined effort of LGNZ and Taitoa. So you may want to give some consideration to supporting that submission if you have time to read it before you finalise this decision today. I'm not sure how you do that.
Be a minor edit if we were going to do it. It would add a sentence. Okay. Questions then, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so That being the case, is it worthwhile us making suggestions or discussing this submission?
I would suggest we have liaised closely with Taitura. They've acknowledged that our draft submission was in accordance with their draft submission. My analysis is that theirs is much more fulsome and much more a wider view and supported by input from a lot of councils and a lot of RM experts throughout New Zealand. I think you'd be pretty safe if you supported their submission, and ours was basically a subset of it. It was difficult to give it a Dunedin flavour as such because the concerns are nationwide.
You're saying this submission is gone? Sorry? Yes. In which case I have it. No, I don't think I did. Yes. So I suppose going through in order, the first suggestion might be that because we didn't put up a suggested time frame. We said 10 working days is not enough time, but we didn't make a suggestion as to what might be an appropriate amount of time. And the number that I have heard elsewhere, of course, being aligned to building control days for turning consents around is 20 days. But however, these things could be more complicated and perhaps possibly 30 days. So do you have any comment on which would be a reasonable amount of days, 20, 30 or some other number?
So, yes, I understand that there's concern around the 10 working days for giving feedback on recommendations to the committee. Taitura and LGNZ have suggested 20, if not 30, so they're hedging their bets, but 20 at least, 30 would be better.
Yes, so could we put that in our submission, please? So, yep, sorry?
Edit point 9 to increase it to 30 days. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, point 9. So that's good. Now,
Mr. Chair, if I may, it would be that's the covering report, but we'd also need to edit the actual submission to include, if you wanted to move it to 20 working days, because the oh no, sorry, my apologies.
yes, so what I'm suggesting is altering point 9 to say a minimum of 20 days or possibly 30 days, so that we cover our bets there. But if we settle at 20, it's at least something better. The other questions are in points 11 through to 15. So 11 and 12, the infrastructure plan and cost recovery. So I'm quite concerned that we've got a lot of information about various things to do with carbon, but the critical one very important factor of this legislation is it may expose council to a great deal of expense, which is of some concern. So I think there's 4 different ways in my mind that could be addressed, because there's 4 different parts to the submission. So firstly, the infrastructure plan, 11 and 12. 11, it's, they need to come in with a summary of consultation, and 12, there should be an assessment from DCC or from councils about the assessment of that infrastructure. So, there's 2 elements there. Cost recovery for that. Firstly, the process of having to do all that work, and similarly, a plan that would go with a proposed fast-track approval, which might require quite a change to the city's infrastructure. And so provision for that change in our infrastructure to be paid for by the project. So I just think we should categorically state that.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. So your comments suggest that the language in those points 11 through to 15 needs to be
11 and 12 in the first instance. Yep. And 12 in particular for the construction cost recovery for council, because there may be a great significant amount of construction required of infrastructure to support a project. I think it's quite important that we have a clear ask for cost recovery on any infrastructure construction required.
Thank you for the clarification. That's what I was seeking, the construction cost recovery, the infrastructure costs.
Sorry, can I just suggest that borrowing some wording from the FDS, which you was recently completed, which focuses on construction costs and ongoing operational maintenance costs, that we use those words? Yep.
Yes, please. Absolutely. And I just think it needs to be spelled out in the fast track provisions. And part A is being the plan, because they will firstly come up with an infrastructure plan. So the cost to council of preparing submissions to that plan and responses to that plan should also be chargeable to the project. And then moving on to processing, of course, of their plans, which is clauses 13 and 14. So firstly they develop the plan, then we have to process their plan, and then there's the construction costs of whatever they are proposing. And lastly, the fourth item that I've got here is the liability chain. And this is, I think, really important, well, the most important, because it could have the greatest ramification, is where does the liability and cost recovery lie once a project has gone through this process and then begins? Who's taking responsibility for costs that may arise? Because we have a situation currently where if council consents a project, then all responsibility ratchets back to the council. And I mean, that's entirely inappropriate in this process in my mind. So that the liability chain and who is responsible needs to be spelled out. So that's clause 15 in their submission. But I think that we should be looking for absolutely clear wording in the legislation so that everybody knows for sure where liability lies. And preferably there should be none with council, but who knows?
Do you have specific wording for that you'd like
No,
to?
I have not drafted specific wording. We've already had an example of.
It's going to be hard to pass the resolution if we don't know what the change
Well, I
is
think
going
we
to
have
be.
an expert currently who would be able to come up with something.
So long as we can keep it under minor editorial changes.
Yes,
Yep.
that'll be fine. Thank you.
Cool.
And if I may, please, we'll cross-reference back to the more fulsome LGNZ Taitawara submissions to see if those points Mr Mayor has raised are covered.
Very good. Councillor Benson Pope.
Is it not the case that what we've just been talking about you could refer to as a band-aid on a serious wound? The real injury is the complete contradiction between this legislation and all our own planning processes, like the FDS that has just been completed, as a result of decades of analysis and work in this community. A fast-track process that is potentially also corrupt, as is now being highlighted in the news, could override that. Irrespective of what the consequences of that might be, the real injury is in the nature of the legislation.
I guess I would highlight the LGNZ and Taitawara submission, which has a sort of a broader philosophical introduction around the absence of attaching the legislation to any existing legislative goals around sustainable management and the RMA. So there's some suggestions there of losing sight of sort of what's the key driver. So whether you want to have something like that in the DCC submission is over to you.
I think we might also reserve that for speeches. Like, it's a bit hard to ask the staff to give effectively a political answer. Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you. Reading through it, I was struck by, first of all, the same sort of sentiment that is in much of the public, no mention of built heritage, the building on conservation land, as Councillor Benson Pope said, basically flying in the face of all of our own systems and practices and policies. So I guess I would like us to be, is it possible that we can be stronger in our wording and our message, perhaps falling just short of the contempt that to me seems to be rather thick through this bill? Is it possible, for example, there is only one sentence that I could find which mentions the concern around building conservation areas, and it is on page, whatever the hell page that is, 40.6. It is particularly concerning that there is a specific provision in the bill that a project including an activity that would be prohibited under a district plan is not necessarily eligible. That to me seems rather weak kind of wording rather than the sentiment we may actually wish to express. Can we make it stronger?
Again, we can certainly cross-reference and check the broader submissions to see how that's been framed, and certainly, with your lead and direction, we can augment the commentary and the language in here. I guess in terms of following a due process, how that plays out here today and subsequent to today. And noting that the draft submission, as you see it, has been provided to the select committee already. So it's just the evolution of our submission, and to take on board all of these comments and to frame it in a way that you think is appropriately resonates and articulates the sentiment that is being expressed.
And in terms of our built heritage, what, if any, impact or potential impact is there that you can see in this bill? Because from what I can see, it might make it easier to have some car parks where once there weren't.
The way the bill is drafted, any resource consent or notice of requirement or certificate of compliance type application project can go to the ministers, and the ministers ultimately will decide, and they will do it with advice from an expert panel and feedback from council, but ultimately the basis for their decisions doesn't necessarily include the Resource Management Act, the district plan, or anything else. And so everything's literally up for grabs.
Just following up on Councillor Gilbert's question, I think that's why when we did the 3 water submissions, we had a workshop ahead of time, and I just would recommend just in general, just the staff in general, that if we've got a relatively complex submission, even if we've got a tight time frame, a workshop ahead of time is quite useful for making sure that we get the paragraphs written in such a way, and then this meeting section item becomes a lot shorter when it comes here. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for all the work that's gone into this. I know it's been a quick turnaround and it's such an important submission given the interest of the community. I've got a couple of questions. One is around paragraph 3, and I really appreciate the points made in there about the loss of decision making at a local level, and also around the decision making by just several ministers. I wonder if we could make that wording stronger, because what I'm hearing from the community, and certainly on this morning's RNZ, the Auditor General's comments around the dangers of having just a couple of ministers making the decisions and the possibility of conflicts of interest. I think that's a really important point that our community would want us to reflect there. So I wonder if we could make that wording stronger in some way. And I realise as staff are walking that fine line. How is, in terms of the local government submission, is that covered more strongly in there?
It's covered. There's more explanation around what their concerns are, and they offer up the same approach that we have, where our preference would be that it was the expert panel that made the decision, and if they went with the joint ministers, that the Minister for the Environment was added to that.
Appreciate that. Could we add the word our strong preference or something like that even, because I think that's pivotal. That certainly would be something I'd want to see. And then going down to the bottom to paragraph 15, I wondered if you could unpack some examples perhaps of, it refers to unintended consequences. It mentions liability, and I certainly had a concern about that. I think that needs clarity, but we need to seek clarity on that, and that is mentioned. But in terms of unintended consequences for infrastructure or the environment, could you unpack that slightly for us? Give us some examples of how that may play out here, just possibilities.
So the process is obviously it's fast tracked, it's quick, and there's concern that they may not take into consideration all the knock-on effects of approving a development. For instance, you could approve a large building in a built-up part of a city and not realise that there was groundwater beneath that land which needed to go into the stormwater system, and that could be at a huge cost to the council. Equally, you could have a sensitive environment nearby where you don't have time to do a full ecological assessment, and something could happen which damaged that. So it's the speed of the process and the time for councils to have input into that process and others that lead to a possibility of a quick decision which gets something built quickly, but knock-on effects for the environment and for infrastructure and therefore for council.
Thank you for that. And you may not be able to answer this question, and don't if you don't feel able to, but it would be my impression that many people in the community wouldn't necessarily understand the unintended consequences of this. They're potentially alarmed by it, but don't necessarily understand what could happen. And by the time they do, it's going to be too late. Is that your sense in terms of the community from your work with the FDS and 2GP, that despite staff's best efforts to engage with people, there are still people out in the community who weren't engaged in the process or didn't engage in the process, and suddenly later on realise what some of the plans mean?
Thank you, Councillor. I would say broadly that's true, and it's part of the ongoing education we attempt to achieve in terms of crystallising and condensing the complexity of the provisions that we're dealing with in a way that is tangible for the public at large to understand.
And I emphasise despite best efforts of staff. Cheers, thank you.
Through the chair, just to say that the resource consents team spend a great deal of their time informing and assisting applicants to navigate, and both in the both consenting space, both in resource management and later on building. If things go wrong, often council is one of the first places they go to seek redress.
Yeah, that's, as Queenstown Wells knows, over leaking buildings. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the team. I certainly don't envy you in what is very fast-moving waters of government change at the moment. I broadly support this, and my question is around the difficulty that's been raised about getting that local flavour. But my one question relates to, you've used the term cross-referencing. I'm wondering if we can do that via the Taituara submission, LGNZ submission, related to the biodiversity impacts. And I say that in the context of us being the wildlife capital of New Zealand, and the fact that it's fairly well assumed that the fast-tracking bill will be bad news for biodiversity. So I'm just wondering, so the question is there anything within that larger submission around biodiversity, and there's a possibility of cross-referencing that in the context of us being the wildlife capital of New Zealand.
Well, just briefly, because I've only just read it before this meeting, they do mention about a sustainable environment, and that sort of terminology is used in terms of those unintended consequences or knock-on effects. So they do touch it, and they may well have something more fulsome in there, which we can.
And I guess further question that goes back to what the chair said, this would have been very useful to have workshops. I'm really uncomfortable us doing this on the hoof before a submission goes in, but I think it is imperative for us in terms of our economic development. We are dependent on our fauna that inhabits this land, and it I think that should be part of this submission. And as I say, I'm sort of uncomfortable doing it like this on the hoof. I think you're ignoring me.
Okay, what I'm having is Ms. Murray put up everything she's capturing, and then when we've got it sitting up there, then I'll move it and ask for a seconder. But it's just a method, so we can actually, because it is incredibly difficult understanding orders to edit a submission, and it would require that we agree with the edited changes. So what I'll have is, as she's capturing them right now, put them up so you can see them. We'll adjourn for a few minutes to make sure the wording is correct, and then I'll either take them singularly if there's disagreement, or we'll take them in the whole, and that's how we'll deal with the editing.
Great.
Councillor Benson-Pope? They will be minor, yeah.
Just a procedural question. At the end of the submission, we ask to speak. The normal expectation is that if that's granted, and one assumes that this is going to a select committee, one hopes this is going to a select committee. If that's the case, the normal scenario is that the mayor or his nominee does it. I'm just concerned to make sure that that is what happens. Can I be confident that I guess it's a question for you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, that's what actually the motion said, that the mayor or his nominee.
All right. Thank you.
Cool. Get to
And Councillor, through the chair, paragraph 17 in the submission does state that welcomes the opportunity to speak at any hearing.
Yep. Okay, so we will make sure that we request to speak, and that the mayor or with a representative will also do so. Councillor Van der Vis.
Under E, section 15 on page 35, it complains of the impact on affordability to councils of providing infrastructure or services to new developments approved through the fast track process. Isn't it the case that any new developments would be subject to development contributions, so we would be able to recoup costs that way? And isn't it also the case that any new developments would attract additional rates as well? So I'm wondering why it is that this is listed as one of the difficulties with the fast track process.
So there would be a time delay between when the development contributions policy could be refreshed to actually collect money for any new development. So yes, in time, it would be the case, I presume, that the development contributions might capture that new development, but there would be a period of time where it wouldn't be, because it needs to be added. That's my understanding of how things work. So there would be a time where the money would not be collected.
So are you then basically saying you don't want any new development in Dunedin because there'll be a time lag before the development contributions kick in? I mean, if that's the argument, it's an argument against all development, is it not?
There's more questions than that, though, Councillor Van der Vis, so if we can answer that confined question, but I'll have another question that relates, which is similar to what you're asking, and it would reflect.
Sorry, I was asking a question of staff.
Yep. Let's just keep it tight.
If I may, Councillor, the fast track bill looks at regionally and nationally significant infrastructure. So we are encouraging and permitting, particularly through the future development strategy, growth and development in the region. This is an overlay that has scale and significance, and the implications may not be fully determined in the first instance. So that's why the note there in terms of the affordability, it might cross a threshold beyond which we can, in the first instance, accommodate.
My question is, and I'll restate it, if there is a problem with funding new developments in general, are we opposed to any new developments because of the lag between when the development happens and when we can charge development contributions and extra rates?
So the answer to that is no. There is no policy of council to not support development because there's a delay in collecting development contributions.
I never suggested that there was a policy. What I am suggesting is that the reason for having E in here seems to be a delay involved with any new development. And I'm wondering why it's there.
Can I ask a directing question, if you don't mind? Could a development be something like a freight transfer hub or a new port, which might require a couple of $100 million worth of transport infrastructure spend to support it once it gets up and gets going? And would that be of a concern to a territorial authority that if an activity started that was regionally or nationally significant under the eyes of the ministers, but the consequences of local production of or supply or facilities to support that activity had not been taken into account of the decision? Would that be what E is more talking about?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and that's why I was attempting to convey in my response. It's the proportionality of the development in relation to the local and long-term plans as we know them today.
Because the fast-track legislation, if I'm correct, is really about regional and national significant infrastructure spends as being one of the primary objectives or primary focuses? Or actually look into policy as well to say, do you think that's where okay, I guess my question is, we're all trying to figure out where this is going to end up landing and what kind of activities are going to be captured by the fast-track legislation. But is it likely to be a brand new suburb greenfield development getting fast-tracked, or is it more likely to be a transport or a Three Waters large infrastructure spend that gets fast-tracked?
So we don't have the list of projects. They have released the list of organizations that were invited to submit projects, and based on that list, I would suspect that it could be more than regionally, nationally significant infrastructure, though that is certainly one of the things that's highlighted. So the reading of that list of parties might be the only indication that we have of the projects that might find their way in there. And just to follow up on the affordability question, affordability is a relevant consideration, but it's one of a number of things that needs to be assessed when evaluating development, as was done in the FDS. When you're looking at options, you must look at costs and benefits, affordability, a whole range of matters against policy criteria, but it doesn't mean that there's no sort of set ratio as such that something would be knocked back, but certainly there are degrees of affordability in development versus what you get in return in any normal cost-benefit analysis.
And in a consent hearing, that would be the sort of stuff that would come up as part of the evidence, would be the cost of providing the services for the proposed activity.
Yes, precisely.
And so is your concern that if that is circumnavigated in some way or another, then that particular consideration may not be looked at properly?
Well, that's exactly what it's highlighting. Is it's allowing a fast-track process that may not undertake that evaluation as thoroughly as it might be done if it's done under this legislation and under the plans and policies that are developed under that legislation.
Thank you. So, sorry for interrupting your question, but I just wanted to get that set out there. Do you want to continue with your question? Okay, thank you. Anybody, any more questions? Councillor Walker?
You might not be able to answer this, but I know it was a problem for many people. Was it a problem putting this submission together in the context of the fact that the release list that you've just alluded to was only released hours before submissions were due to close?
Without having the list of projects, we can only speculate, contemplate as to how a regionally or nationally significant development may play out in this region and be in concert or otherwise with our planning and policy frameworks. In terms of writing the submission, we've attempted just to convey how we would still like to have a degree of alignment with our regional spatial planning policies.
Any more questions? Councillor Lucas.
Mine's a follow-up question in terms of the fact that the list of, let's say, potential projects, the submissions on that doesn't close till the 2nd or the 3rd of May. So, and we don't have any ability to submit on that list, or do we? I mean, and as you say, we've only seen the list of possible submissions, and so if, yeah, I mean, do we want to make reference to the fact that there is lacking in the ability to submit to that list?
If I might, you know, in drafting the submission and the fact that that list wasn't available and it's closing later, and council itself could nominate projects for that list as well, we just relied on what the purpose of the bill is, and I'll just quickly read it out again, but it's to provide a fast-track decision-making process that facilitates the delivery of infrastructure and development projects with significant regional or national benefits. And so it could be any number of things, and we still don't know what they will be, and then we don't know what they'll be in the Dunedin context. So it hasn't really changed the submission as far as I'm concerned.
I think I'll be closed down on this. So the fact that 3 of the most recognised environmentally most destructive companies in New Zealand are on that list, namely Tallies, Fonterra, and the famous Trans-Tasman Resources, who want to mine off South Taranaki, makes no difference? Sorry, you don't have to.
Getting pretty close to a political question from staff. Any more questions? I have one, and it relates to, actually, I recused myself from the FDS decision over the inland port because I realised I had this role to play as well, and it was becoming a conflict of the 2 roles. At the time of the FDS, it was said that don't worry about putting anything on the FDS because there'll be a requirement for a consent if there's going to be any changing of the zone. However, could this activity, could the fast-track activity override that protection?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Okay, that's it for questions then. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have Ms Murray put up what we thought were the amendments that she's captured as best, and then we're going to adjourn for till 5 past, well actually it's almost 10 o'clock now, so we'll adjourn till 10:10. Sorry, 11:10, yeah, daylight saving. We'll adjourn till 11:10 so we can go through the wording of this. We'll treat it as like it's a workshop for the wording section of it, and then when we're done we'll come back at 10 minutes past. Second to Councillor Walker. All those in favour? Okay, adjourned.
Will that be a public workshop?
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting back to order at 11:23. It was a few minutes longer than the 10 I gave. What we've got up here in front of us is each of the questioners who have questioned each section. It's their wording of what they would like to have the editorial change be. So what I'll have you do is look over it. I'd like to take those changes as a whole. So if you've any particular one that you, well, firstly, I'm more than happy if anybody wants to change, look at the wording of any one of these suggestions, and then I'll relax the standing orders a little bit so we can talk a bit more freely. And then if we can take them as a whole, then we'll take them as a whole. So then the staff have a clear direction as to what they have to do to the editorial changes. So I'll give you a few minutes to look at that. Okay, now you can scroll it up to. Okay. That's Councillor Walker. Well, what? Yeah. When you're speaking, can you just turn the mics on so it has been. It's for it's Councillor Walker put in the paragraph 14 change. Please use your microphones, guys, because the people on the video can't hear what you're saying if you don't use your mic. Yep.
Can I ask Councillor Walker where you want that to go?
To be honest, no idea. My remit was I was asked to construct something around making sure we have some. Well, my desire is to have something in there that highlights the fact that this city is the wildlife capital of New Zealand, and that the biodiversity is core and central to what we do as a city, particularly as an economic driver. Where it goes, I don't really care, but it speaks to the it's part of, it's referenced, the very start of it references the section in the LGNZ submission. So where we stick it, I'm agnostic, to be honest.
Do you want it as a new paragraph, a standalone paragraph?
As I say, I'm agnostic. I don't, as long as
I'm getting
as
a general
there.
nodding around the room.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Yeah.
we'll suggest it's a standalone paragraph. Paragraph X. And then, cool. No, they'll number it. They'll sort the numbering out as the minor editorials at the end. Councillor Fiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair, just to correct Tai Tuara, it needs a macron after the last day.
Might be beyond our word processing.
I will
meeting, but yes,
fix that. It's just that I don't have the ability with this keyboard.
Kira, just the new para 17 was supporting the submission of LGNZ and Taituara on this bill. Just caution against the blanket support, because as we just discussed in the break, that paragraph 3 in the submission actually refers to one-stop shops, amalgamations, and I think that's something that really needs to be considered and due diligence done. So there could be a whole range of tentacles and implications. So I think at the beginning of the wording, it actually does exclude it, but that one would that sentence there would contradict the first sentence.
if we use the word generally, in general,
in principle, in general.
in general, we support will be the editorial change to that.
Thank you.
Any other comments, Councillor Lucas?
That line that says para 14, is that an additional bullet point? Because we've got 4 bullet points under para 14, so I just presume that's another bullet point request that there is a clear change.
So that who put that in?
I think it was you, Mr Mill. Did you do that? Says para 14. We request that there is a clear chain of liability. Is that an additional?
Yes, that's an additional sentence.
Sorry, I think that should be at the end of paragraph 15.
Yes, I think yes, I think it's para 15 is just the ending of that paragraph, and we request there is a
I guess that's changed. 14 changes to 15.
Yes, it's 15.
Where it says para 14.
Change it to para 15.
Yeah, margin, just make it 15.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
So new sentence at the end.
Yep, they'll get that. Any other questions or comments? So are we happy to take it in the whole? That's what I'm looking at, just for nods. Okay, then, if we can get to the top of that, so I can read it. This is the part A of the resolution. There's parts B and C, which is authorising the chief executive and to make any minor editorial changes. There shouldn't be much left after this, and then authorises the mayor to delegate to speak at the hearings, or delegate to speak at the hearings, which is Councillor Benson Pope's comment. So I move that the committee approves the DCC submission with any amendments on the Fast Track Movement Bill 2024, and that the staff incorporate into the submissions everything that's listed on the screen. And then B, authorises the chief executive to make any minor editorial changes to the submission if required, and C, authorises the mayor to delegate to speak at any hearings in regard to the DCC submission. Seconded, Councillor Witherall. I have a feeling there might be a few people who wish to speak to this, or not. Anybody? Councillor Van der Vis.
I can't support the submission because the people that I represent are, in large part at least, incredibly frustrated at how slowly our processes roll currently. They're incredibly frustrated about the continuing loss of productivity in New Zealand generally. If we look back 70 years, New Zealand had one of the highest levels of productivity in the OECD, and it's taken 7 years of obsessive compliance, bureaucracy, and other hurdles and barriers to reduce us now to the bottom of the OECD productivity scale. We're down the bottom now with Greece. Most of the business people that I speak with, and I had some visiting me again last night, are incredibly frustrated by the degree of micromanaging and compliance that goes on, and this submission to me is basically just more of the same. The slow to glacial planning consent processes that we have indulged have meant that New Zealand has fallen back behind other countries. And then when you look at New Zealand itself, Dunedin has fallen back behind all other cities in terms of development and in terms of disposable income for our citizens. The compliance regimes and the to give an example, if you go to Napier, perhaps a similar sized city to Dunedin, but less, they have a very poor natural harbour, but they have 3 inland ports, and they have a volume throughput through their port that is only exceeded by Tauranga. So they have an absolutely vibrant port system, the kind of thing that we should have been emulating for decades, and after 20 years of talking about it, we're still talking about an inland port. Napier have had 3 up and running for many years now, very successfully. What I believe this government fast-track bill is trying to address is this incredibly slow, difficult issue of actually getting anything to happen. And an inland port or 2 or 3 would be a case in point. What we have done, and what I think this submission simply adds to, is smothering any possible developments, especially large ones, with environmental and Maori sensitivity barriers. There is so much that cannot happen anymore because everything has to be so compliant and take so long and be so expensive to get through consenting processes that a lot of things just simply don't happen in the first place anymore. If you look at the cost of trying to build a house these days, you see the same thing. It's orders of magnitude far more expensive to even get consent to build something or do anything than it was 20 years ago. So for that reason, I'm going to vote against the submission in its entirety, and the different additions to me are simply just little fringe ideas that if they get to be read at all by central government will simply result in an eye roll.
Any other speakers? Councillor Walker? Oh, no, actually, Councillor Gary, sorry. And then Councillor Witherell, then Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fringe ideas. Colleagues, thank you for all of your contributions to the amendments to give our position. And I cannot leave it hanging that Dunedin is, and these are my words, that it's stagnating. It is not. Dunedin is developing. Just look at all of the cranes around the city. We have a new hospital coming. There is a great deal on the way, and science and technology is a growth sector. So in my role as Deputy Chair of Economic Development, I cannot leave that comment standing. On this morning's RNZ, there was a lot of discussion around potential conflicts of interest for the ministers who, according to this bill, may be the ones who have the power to make decisions. And there was commentary too about the pendulum having swung in entirely the other direction. And yes, people do find compliance frustrating, and we can all comment on that, but the pendulum is definitely through this bill swinging far too far the other way. I want to acknowledge staff's work on this, the work they do around the 2GP and implementing that, the work that's just gone on through the FDS. And I have to say it must be incredibly disheartening for those who work so hard in this area, and I've seen this through RMA hearings, to have a bill like this before Parliament that basically can run roughshod over all of that, protecting our environment. And as a wildlife capital of New Zealand, we should be really concerned, whether it be around the loss of local decision making, around the cutting across projects that have been prohibited, across bylaws that we have in place. And you have to wonder, why bother? Why do we bother to have those things if this legislation could cut across it? Not to mention our efforts around carbon emissions, and also, and I take great exception to the way it was just articulated, but also to make sure we honour mana whenua and the things that they hold dear. Certainly there is an implication that we're going to wear the costs and that we're going to wear the liability, and I have great concerns about that. And I have grave concerns about the unintended consequences. I think we have a fairly good idea about what some of those might be. And I make the suggestion that the community that may not be all over this particular bill and may have engaged or not with our FDS and 2GP, once the consequences, the unintended consequences of this bill become obvious to our community, they will be up in arms. It will be too late by that time. So I thank my colleagues for these amendments. I feel really strongly about this, and I thought the suggestion this morning on RNZ around applicants to have their projects fast-tracked, to list in detail their contact with the various ministers to be really important, that that is back on the applicants. But something has to be done, because this bill could make a huge impact on our city in a very, very negative way. Thank you.
Councillor Witherell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome the proposed council submission in regards to the fast track bill. We as council and councillors, I'm sure, are united with our counterparts around the country, not wanting to relinquish control of progress within our city. We know our city best, and it's imperative we retain control. However, red tape is a stumbling block for all progress, and I welcome initiatives to streamline and speed up processes which over time have become way too complex and time consuming. Central government most definitely needs local government, and I look forward to an amicable outcome this fast track bill will bring. I will be supporting this submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. I'm still frantically writing and thinking and deciding what to say, but I'll start with some of the stuff I've written here. First off, thank you to the staff for what is a pretty fraught process in current political times. And thank you to us for the amendments, which are useful. I'm certainly very glad that we are submitting. Whether it's heard or not, we should always do that. And I'm very glad that the DCC does not support the ability to override local decision making on matters that are important to the health and well-being of local communities and indeed the environment. And I'd say, what's the point of us having a district plan if 3 ministers can simply override it? We might as well just pack up and go home. And to Councillor Van der Vis's point, consenting processes go slowly for good reason. They make sure that, you can smile all you want, but they do. They make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to progress larger projects. That's why we have a district plan, and they also have protections there to protect people's well-being, and importantly for me, the protection of our environment and the biodiversity that shares this planet with us. So we're potentially looking at a bill here that would sidestep democratic processes by allowing politicians, not experts, to make our final decisions. The fast track approvals bill introduced under urgency on 7th of March would actually take precedence over several of our current environmental laws and give ministers the power worryingly to skirt existing approval processes, which is quite astounding. On RNZ this morning, for those who listened, we had Prime Minister Luxon stated, and his words were that the fast track bill would be good for the environment. And he said this by citing the fact that we could fast track solar panel projects, for example, but he conveniently didn't mention that, as Greenpeace has pointed out and publicly stated this week, that the listing of companies includes the most environmentally destructive industries in New Zealand. I listed them earlier, but I'll remind you they include environmental destroyers such as Frontera, Tallies, who are certainly not good for the bird on the back of the $5 note, and Trans-Tasman Resources, who have a terrible environmental record and are really keen to bid to mine off the Taranaki coast. Also worryingly, decision-making criteria are weighted towards development. I mean, that's very clear. I don't think the government's actually hiding that. Not environmental protection or sustainable resource use. They also undermine New Zealand's obligations to protect the country's unique and threatened biodiversity, and that extends to this region's unique biodiversity. New Zealand's economy relies on the environment, actually. One study estimated New Zealand's land-based ecosystem services contributed $57 billion to human welfare in 2012, 27% of this country's GDP. This includes services such as crop pollination by insects, erosion controls by plants, and flood regulations by wetlands. And that's partly why I asked for this amendment, and thank you for including it. And I think it's really important that we do not forget what we're proud of as a city, that the environmental sustainability is the foundation on which this city's enduring economic outcomes depend. And I'll just close by saying that I am currently sceptical whether this and the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of submissions from the public around this, over 90% of which are around the environmental concerns will be listened to. But let's hope they are, and let's keep our fingers crossed, because the many creatures that swim in the oceans out here don't have a voice. Thank you.
The next speaker will be Councillor Houlihan. She was originally apology for the meeting, but she has contacted to say that she can attend and has been here for the whole of the item on Zoom. So at the leave of the meeting, I will ask her to join us back and speak now. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I will support this if I'm allowed to count my vote, which I think I am. But I have serious concerns about it, and I 100% agree with many of the things that the former councillors have just said now. I've been reading some of the articles on this and my mouth just falls open. I can't believe it. It's incredible that in this day and age, in our beautiful country, that this is being allowed, to think that 3 ministers could have the power to overturn decisions that have been thought out and looked at by independent people is just incredible. I am just gobsmacked at what could happen here, and the potential for conflict of interest is just huge. As Simon Upton said today in the paper, he also voiced concerns about it, and I note he is also, of course, National Party, or National Party linked, and the fact that the Environment Minister is not connected with this. There's so many things that are wrong with the fast tracking. It is unbelievable. As a former conservation reporter, I think of all the things that I covered for many years and the damage that so many of those things could do. I can remember landing on, mind you, that's, I suppose, not very good to say I landed on it, on a place down in the sub-Antarctics called Adams Island, and only 5 people walked on it, and then I added my footprints to it as well. But, things like that need to remain pristine and precious. And the way that Minister Jones is talking about how wonderful it is to let mining run rampant over our country, I think is alarming. It is just really scary what could happen if he's set loose on letting anything go ahead. It's just terrifying, quite frankly. Thank you.
Councillor Fiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, aroha mai. I was just indicating Councillor Houlihan's hand, but I'll take advantage and speak. Yeah. First of all, I'd also like to reiterate thanks to the staff for working on this, and especially in the challenging environments that's provided by our dear central government. And I'd just like to say I totally support the submission, of course, and for me, this fast-track bill is just another continuation of the 100-day plan. The first 100 days, Te Aka Whai Ora, the Māori Health Authority, was disestablished. Totally Māori hating, in my opinion. Repealing the anti-smoking legislation was also totally Māori hating, and I think, with respect to the environment, this new legislation is just a continuation of the current government's antipathy towards tangata whenua and towards the environment. So, kia kaha te tuato.
Mr. Mayor.
To me, life's a balance. And one of the things that's consistently happened in this country is that things can tend very strongly in one direction, and then as a counteraction to that, or as a response to that, things tend to move in the opposite direction. And so things have gotten bogged down in terms of consenting and getting developments through. And the fast track, we have had fast track processes over recent years. And so this is just the latest version of the fast track, because there's actually a general recognition that a fast-track process is required. And so this is, the latest rendition of that. I believe a fast-track process was used to push through consenting processes for our new Dunedin hospital, and I believe that went well. So this is the latest response, and I think our submission to the bill is entirely appropriate, and it is largely straightforward in what we are saying without getting too politicised, because I think one of the things we could easily be doing is politicising it greatly. So the key things to me, of course, well, not of course, but the two key things for me was having the Minister for the Environment included in their panel of ministers, and I did advocate that in another forum a week or so ago, and I think spoke to the Minister herself about that. And I think that is very important, so at that highest level, that at least someone is there speaking for the environment. But very importantly for us here in Dunedin, and with all local authorities, is to have the ability to recover costs, because what we don't need in this country are more unfunded mandates for local government. Local government is right up against ever-increasing costs, and many of those costs stem from unfunded mandates. So it's very important that we don't get any more of those, and I think there is a degree of sympathy within the government for the situations that local councils find themselves in, having to accept, take on liabilities that they didn't trigger, or deal with enforcement actions that don't come with associated funding. So I think I'm pleased with the general tone of the submissions, the additions to our submission, and I commend the staff for the submission they've written at very short notice that covers a great deal of things that ought to be modified slightly in this bill, and they've done that in quite a relatively concise fashion, so thank you for that.
Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you. I agree that irrelevant hurdles and red tape are indeed limiters on some development. But to suggest that economic development is contingent on removing restrictions and controls on what and where things can happen, including deeming irrelevant all little things like the district plan or even the Resource Management Act, is, in my opinion, spurious and an approach that has long since been outdated. To say I'm concerned with this bill is understanding it severely. No requirements to consider the principles of sustainable management of natural and physical resources, nor the district plan, or regional strategies, or even, as I say, the Resource Management Act. That seems to me to be almost the textbook definition of short-sighted and a synonym for reckless. It's been mentioned that it's difficult to include a local flavour in the submission, and at a time when we're asking for more ability to oversee and control the direction of our region, this seems to be more than a slap in the face to me. To me, this is the government clearly saying that it has no faith in local authorities to know what is best for our region, our people and our land. A few weeks ago I questioned Minister Bishop around allowing territorial authorities more authority on activities in the region that they govern. His response was dismissive, to put it politely. So I share Councillor Walker's doubt that this will be given due consideration or even approached with open minds. As I mentioned in my questions, I would like us to be stronger in our message, being more forceful in our wording, and I'm glad to support the additions that we've got here.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also add my thanks to the staff for the work under time pressure that they've undertaken to identify the issues, and the draft submission doesn't leave anything to the imagination, and I think it's further improved by the request from the table here for stronger language and a few other matters to be stressed. I think this proposed legislation can only really charitably be described as environmental vandalism. It attacks everything that has made this country so progressive in recent times, and it does extraordinary damage potentially to that biodiversity that we treasure here and elsewhere. And I thank you, Councillor Walker, for the particular focus that you've added to the submission around that. If anyone's got any doubt about the tracking going on here, look at what's just happened. And Councillor Lafiso identified some of those issues, but I want to add the lifting of the bycatch limit on the southern fur seal. Thank you, Mr. Jones. And I'm not going to bother talking about bottom trawling because here comes seabed mining. Just watch that space. What's next? Bird catch? And I think consistently, if the attitude that's been taken to the seal and bycatch of seal in fishing is mirrored in what happens with bird bycatch, then watch out, the albatross. I haven't mentioned Freddie the Frog because that was the greatest piece of political and social stupidity, I think, in the annals of what's been said around environmental or non-environmental issues. But the really egregious thing about this is, and it's just been highlighted by a couple of people, is that despite all our processes and all our public consultation, which lead to the red tape that people are whinging about, to protect our environment and people's rights, that's what it's about. And thank you, Councillor Gilbert, for talking about the need for rules. And despite all that effort, this bill allows to happen issues that are prohibited, not just discretionary, prohibited by our planning processes. And that is nothing less than a complete outrage. The other issue that's also been highlighted in the media in the last 48 hours has been the open door to corruption. We all know there have been historic arguments about political funding, business funding, of private interest funding of political parties in this country. Well, if you want to really open the door to people buying consents and buying approvals for their projects, then support this bill, because that's exactly what it does. There are already very open questions about some of the operators on that list that Councillor Walker has mentioned, particularly in the fishing sector, in their relationship with politicians whose parties they fund. Nothing will change. This will make it much, much worse. And I think the comments from one of our own local academic lawyers this morning, and also what Bryce Edwards is writing nationally, make that more than apparent. It might sound to be alarmist, but it isn't. And this is a direct attack on democracy and appropriate community involvement in decision making, no more and no less.
Any more speakers? I'll exercise my right of reply then, which again I keep forgetting to start, but anyway, it's probably better just to reply. I'm going to start first talking about streamlining and speeding things up and the processes that people have been talking about. The fact of the matter is, yes, it does take a lot longer to consent on something than it used to, because in fact, when you have to talk to all affected parties, you have to give them their time to take into account the information they've been given, get together their answer, and then hear them, and then put that together in some sort of decision-making process. That takes time. And so when you go forward streamlining, you make sure you do not give up oversight, because otherwise you're going to simply get back to where we were many, many, many years ago. This is quite literally, I heard somebody else say, a relatively old way to approach this, and it truly is. This is from your grandfather's and your grandmother's years. The main issue I really see with this particular piece of legislation is it goes further than any other fast tracking has in the past. It clearly will override existing processes that exist, and obviously the most obvious is the district plans. And it's clearly susceptible to improper process. Anybody who has connection to a minister who's sitting on that ministerial decision-making group has a very, very, very strong association with that decision, and currently we have practices to separate that activity apart so that the society itself is protected from the objectives of individuals who are doing it for themselves without taking into account necessarily whether they will or will not have a bad outcome for society, or a good outcome. Could be a good outcome, and that's therefore they would go through the existing consenting process fine. You have to ask yourself, who wants this? Someone who doesn't want to be subject to the existing rules. This is clearly a runaround. This is what this is designed to do. And I believe that we will see something locally relatively soon. And I want to say that I recused myself from the FDS when it came to the freight transfer hub because I couldn't perform my job there as a commissioner. I am deeply concerned, considering that even as the hearings were on, Minister Jones was in the newspaper having visited the site at the request of Port Otago. This is exactly what people are saying, that affected parties, appellants for change, can go directly to a minister and completely go around the local environment. And if they convince the minister that that is worthy, then it will get a tick and away it'll go. Now, when we talked about will you be exposed to undue expenses, there is a heavy traffic bypass proposed for Mosgiel, and we are working forward in our best environment to achieve that for the people of Mosgiel based on what Waka Kotahi is willing to put into it. That is designed, though, to take the current heavy transport that is going around the back of Mosgiel right now. If we have to put more back around there, then that will have to be bigger than the one that is proposed. So this is an additional cost that will come to us. People have said, why have you not ever worked on, why have we taken so long and talked about this and nothing has ever happened? Well, I can ask, maybe you want to ask these people this. Why did the CEO of Port Otago get invited by me as Deputy Chair of Infrastructure when Mayor Cole was the Mayor to talk about inland ports? And no action came from that point of period. Asked the Mayor of Clutha, did I go into his office 6 years ago after Regional Transport Committee meeting and say, I think we need to start talking about an inland port, and I think Melbourne might be the best place for it. I have a position on Melbourne, but it is not fixed. It is simply a starting position because we still haven't gone out and done the necessary analysis that we need to do. And Kiwi Rail. You've been invited to the Regional Transport Committee now for over 3 years in a row and you have still not turned up. So I'm asking you, please turn up. So, yes, there has been bad action and going forward on this activity, but I'm really concerned now that it has appeared in the FDS, the ministerial group that's going to look at this is going to say, look, there is a green flag or green light ready to go. The city has identified it, and now we're going to fast track it. And the appellants councils at the time said, don't worry about putting in the FDS because you'll have to go through the consent process. That's the safety barrier. This fast-tracking analysis will take away the safety barrier, and it then makes everything open to moving forward at a way outside the way we've been doing business for so long. So I support this submission, and I will be voting yes for it. Look at that. Okay, so I put it all by division.
Councillor Ackland.
Aye.
Councillor Benson-Pope. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Gilbert.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
Aye.
Councillor Lafiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lucas.
Aye.
Ms MacDonald.
Aye.
Councillor Mayhem.
Aye.
Mayor Raddick.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Wetherall.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Declared carried 13-1.
Thank you. It is noon. We have 3 items to go. I'm just looking for a general nodding. Do we keep going? Then that has answered my question. I don't need to put that. So item 10, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I don't mean to be difficult, but 13.1 doesn't seem to add up.
It's something one. Marlene and Carmen.
So how many absentees have we got?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Mr. Chair, it's
7,
correct.
8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
17
5, 6, 13, 14. Yep. Okay, so that's good, then we're good on that. So item 10, proposed parking changes, hearings committee, December 2023 recommendation. I won't speak to this report in any length of time because it's unusual that I am the person speaking to the report in the first place. These are the parking changes that were in the hearings committee that was finished in December 7th, 2023. Anybody have any questions on those items? Councillor Ackland.
Oh, gosh. Just a couple of quick questions. I'm sure they'll be easily answered.
Staff will answer them too, by the way.
On page 48, talk about Queen's Drive, 17B. So this is the key themes that have come back from consultation. So 17B says there's a concern of loss of available parking for Otago Boys High School students. I was just wondering...
We've acknowledged them, but we think there's sufficient parking and they're not too far away. That's been our consideration.
And so is that communicated back to those who were submitting that there needs to be provision for that commuter parking? So is that, you know, obviously there's a decision made that there is appropriate commuter parking somewhere else. Is that communicated back to the people that had the concern?
We do communicate, but in this particular instance, I can't recall what was communicated back. Sorry.
Just one more, and this is for you, Mr. Chairman. I note in the committee there was a motion moved by yourself and seconded by Councillor Lucas, and that's, I'll pull up the page 59, and it's basically moving that 3 parks be added to the northern side of Albany Street. And so that was moved by yourself and seconded by Councillor Lucas, and it was lost 2-1, and obviously you have voted against your own motion, which I know you're allowed to do. I was just wondering what the rationale behind that was.
You hit it right on the nail. Basically, you can put up a motion that you intend to vote no to, and in fact, if we don't film those, but if you'd been able to see the film, you would have said that I'm putting this motion up for Councillor Lucas to basically be said that she wanted to make that position, and I said, but you do realise I'll vote no. So it was put up with the intention of being voted down immediately, but I wanted to flag Councillor Lucas's actual specific attention to those 3 sites that the other 2 commissioners did not agree to adding. Cool. Councillor Vandervis. Oh, sorry. Actually, no, you are after Ms McDonald and Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Just seeking some clarification on some letters there about parking. It's AVO parking. Can you explain what the AVO means, please?
It's authorised vehicles only. So basically delivery vehicles and a few others. I think taxis can have AVOs now. Or disabled taxis can get AVOs.
Okay, thank you.
It's a permit-based system that is Dunedin's equivalent to a loading zone. So a range of vehicles can use them. So apart from delivery vehicles and couriers, electricians, or people that need to do short-term jobs and drop things off to do that can get them as well. We issue quite a few.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. One is around mobility parking, and I saw there was some requests for that. Do you get a lot of opposition, or do you get some opposition from, and this is not so much, this is mostly in residential areas, but what sort of response do you get when you're consulting on that?
It's a mixture. Most people generally support mobility parking, but there are some people that would prefer a different parking restriction because they may see that as benefiting their business differently.
Would you say they understand that people with disabilities are customers too?
I can't really comment on that, to be honest.
Fair enough. And on page 58, attachment A, there's a submitter, and I know there was reference to it, I think it was back on page 49, a reference to someone that submitted and was talking about non-allocated spaces, residents-only parking, and an elderly person, I believe, in a particular request. And then I notice back further there's reference to carers and that not aligning with the policy. How flexible are you in those situations where maybe there's an elderly resident, they've got a resident park, but they no longer own a vehicle and it's the carer using it, needing to drop in, drop out. Do we allow some flexibility in terms of that with our residents?
We'll consider any request that comes in, but when it's difficult to enforce, if we go outside of our policy, and it's difficult to manage. So we will consider any circumstances, but what we will need to do in the next year or two is actually review the policy and see if it can be improved.
Thank you. I appreciate the challenges.
It was also actually dealt with by the committee right there and then in the hearings.
Can you?
I can't remember what we did in the end, though, but I know that they were happy with what we decided. Yep.
Yeah. So we were requested to relook at it, and we contacted the person and we looked at options. And I think there was an option suggested at the hearings committee, but actually when we reviewed it, it was decided just to continue with the status quo and give them a general use permit.
Councillor Vandervis.
On page 60, on page 61, we've got Marlow Street, 48 Royal Crescent, and some yellow lines where there used to be unrestricted parking. And the reason given is access to field for emergency and maintenance vehicles. This access for emergency and maintenance vehicles, given that this area has traditionally not got a lot of parks on it anyway, why would you want to restrict parking there?
If I may, through the chair, and putting on my former Parks hat, during sports games, we've had instances at various parks where vehicles have been parked over the only vehicle access onto the sports field, and we've had sports people break a leg, for example, and it's imperative at those times that ambulances can drive straight onto the field. So that's why that small section has been yellow line, to make sure that the access onto the sports field remains there at all times.
Thank you for that. And if we go to page 63, there's 190 metres, 290 metres of no parking restrictions on either side, which I understand at times of certain times there has been significant parking in that area. Given that that road is now so slowed with speed humps, and a lot of people, myself included, just don't use it anymore because it's injurious to our vehicles, why would you want to restrict so much parking there, which is only used occasionally, but very heavily used in sports days, etc.? I mean, there's at least 50 car parks there that you're essentially ruling out.
it's just due to ongoing concerns from residents and the narrowness of the road, and we did have engineers look at it and just assess, given it's a two-way road, I believe, it just isn't safe to have the parking there. That's their assessment.
My final question, there has been a lot of feedback over the years from the public requesting more parking, especially in Central City, especially for commuters. And yet we see this continual stream, and it's been coming for some years now, of parking restrictions and less parking all over the place, but no attempts, it would seem, to act on a number of suggestions for increased parking. I'm thinking of a suggestion that I've been making for quite a few years now, near Ulverston in Queen's Drive. There used to be 10 car parks there that were used absolutely every working day by commuters. The no parking signs went up. A number of other suggestions that I've made for extra parking over the years. Why is it that none of them ever appear in these papers?
Can I ask you a question, Councillor? Have you put it up to the...
Sorry, I've asked the question.
Well, I'm the authoriser on this.
With respect.
I'm the chair of the meeting, and I'm also the authoriser on the paper. So I'm going to ask you a question, which is the answer. Have you put this up in the public consultation component of these parking changes, have you put this request in?
In this particular public consultation, no, but for many years and in many platforms, including social media, have been representing the people that have been clamouring for more parking in many different areas, have put forward suggestions of where those areas could easily accommodate parking at minimal or no cost. None of them actioned on.
And so is that a confirmation that you have not put in any of these into these hearings committees? You have focused on public, like Facebook and those areas, and you've spoken to them in council meetings. I completely acknowledge that. My question is, have you actually put in a submission to the parking changes committees at the time of consultation?
I haven't even recognised when those parking submissions were able to be put in, and wouldn't bother on the basis that nothing ever positive in the parking has ever come out of them.
Okay, but you would agree then that it's very difficult for a committee to consider something it hasn't seen?
No, I would disagree entirely. If they were only to recognise the vast public clamour for more parking, especially Central City parking for commuters, then I think it would be incumbent on them to actually look at a number of the suggestions that have been very publicly made over a long period of time.
But not to them. A Facebook post does not constitute a submission. And so I am going to allow you to I'm not going to bother interrupting your questions anymore, but I would ask you to keep your questions to...
Thank you. I very much appreciate you not interrupting my questions of
the changes
staff.
that are to the item that is in front of us, and not to a general discussion on parking in general in the city, because that is not what is in front of us. What is in front of us is the recommendations from that committee, and I would ask you to keep your questions to submissions to the committee and the committee's decisions. Thank you, sir. Just want to know if Councillor Vandervis is finished or not.
More than finished.
Mr. Mayor.
Look, I have a question. It's also about the parking at Otago Boys High, because that's a two-lane street, and so when it has had cars parked on both sides of it, and that would leave only one lane, would there be insufficient room for two cars?
Certainly for a bigger car, it could be quite difficult to get through, and the vehicles tend to park on the areas where people want to walk as well, so it's also a little bit dangerous for pedestrians. And if you're up there during early school, the kids are actually often walking down the middle of the road, which is not ideal.
Yep, but given that they had been parking on both sides of the road, is that correct? Yes. So if parking was retained on one side of the road, that would still leave the other side of the road for walking and or a vehicle, well, the road still available for driving.
We have marked some parking into the design on one side of the road.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
We have left a 46-metre parking bay in the design to allow some parking.
Yes, that's the small area at the end, but you've taken out 190 metres. The question is, would it be feasible to have one side of the road able to be used for parking? Because obviously there have been complaints about the road being very narrow with cars on either side, but would it be feasible to have one side of the road completely used?
Sorry, I can't comment on that at the moment. I could go back to an engineer and ask that as a question.
Mr Mayor's question reminded me a little bit of Cosydale Road a couple of years ago, where it became an issue for emergency vehicles to be able to get past because they are much bigger than standard vehicles. I guess when you're asking that question, could you refer to the width of the road and the ability of all vehicles that would require to get past to be able to get past? Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I believe we're reconsulting on this again. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor. No, the reconsultation refers to Albany Street only, the Albany Street Connection Project.
Right, for the Albany Street. Are we allowed to talk about that under this? Will there be, I just wondered, what will the impact of that be as far as timelines and things?
Thanks, Councillor. We're working through that. We'll aim to go out and reconsult as soon as possible.
Right. And if the numbers of people or groups and businesses that come back and say they're not happy with those changes, does that then mean that development around Albany Street might not go ahead? Is that the case?
It would end up coming back to the hearings committee, so it would be a decision for the hearings committee.
Right. Okay. And can I ask around the hearings with Albany Street? My concern is that there's obviously a voice of OUSA, but to what degree do you think other students have been heard? Because I certainly, and it was mentioned before, I think a lot of students actually bring a car to university.
Well, I think the thing is, Councillor Houlihan, it is a publicly notified event, and those who feel to speak are not refused. They all can come and speak. If they didn't come and speak, then I guess you are having the consequences. You didn't come and tell the committee your thoughts. So in terms of what is considered when a committee considers everything, they consider all the evidence in front of them and they consider the weight of the evidence.
What attempts did we make to contact students apart from contacting OUSA? Did we do any advertising around the university or poster or social media or anything to try to get them to come and speak at that? Did we do anything like that?
So if staff can speak to the consultation process, and also, given that we're going to do it again, what the new consultation process will be.
Thank you.
The relevant staff aren't here today to talk to that, but we can come back to it.
Okay, thank you very much.
So, Councillor, I can vouch for the fact that a number of the transport people actually went around the businesses at that area, door knocking at the time, and the university, and we're in conversations with OUSA, the university, and the Otago Polytech for a good year leading up to that. Yeah.
Any more questions? Oh, Councillor Gilbert.
Sorry, one just very quick question. Queen's Drive, 46-metre parking bay. Is it parallel, angle? Roughly how many we're going to get in there, I guess is my question.
I believe it's parallel, probably 8 or 9 cars, but that's my guess.
Any more questions? Mr. Mayor.
So that parking bay, was that pre-existing? Has that been put in, or has that been there for a long time?
There wasn't anything before, it was just a stretch of road where cars would park.
Any more questions? I'll put it then that the committee adopts proposed changes to parking and traffic restrictions shown in the December 2023 update of the Dunedin City Council's traffic and parking restrictions database, with the link attached. Notes that the hearings committee has considered feedback from consultation on the proposed changes to parking restrictions, and C notes that all parking restrictions previously approved by council remain unchanged. Does anybody wish to speak to it? Oh, seconded by, I actually caught Councillor Mayhem's eye just before yours. Seconded by Councillor Mayhem. Anybody wish to speak to it? If you do, yeah.
I'm concerned about that Queen's Drive area between Braid Road and City Road. And, you know, the fact that the whole road now has been shut off for parking and a very small area at one end allowed for some angle parking. And so given that there were two full lines of cars there of recent times, there's clearly a very large demand for parking in the area, and I think it would be much more preferable to try having cars just on one side of the road, because that would still leave the majority of the road plus the verge where cars were parking. So it's a pretty solid and a good, generous width of road for emergency vehicles and cars to get past, as well as pedestrians to walk. So it seems to me that this is a little bit excessive in terms of the reduction of parking. That's 190 metres. That's quite a long area of road. Now, is it feasible to take that out and go back for discussion with the engineer? Because as we've heard, it was that would need to be discussed with roading engineers. Is that possible to take that out or not? Say that?
I think the fact is, procedurally speaking, it probably would have been better if you'd come to the hearings at the time. But also the other one is, these reviews come up over and over and over again. So rather than take it out, if it is something that you think that needs to be considered, then I think you would put it in for request for the next cycle of decisions, rather than we shouldn't be editing the committee's decision here. We either accept it or reject it, but we don't go in and do point editing. I think that would undermine the process. That's my thought. I know we just speeches, but I mean, I think I needed to answer that.
That's available.
Councillor Ackland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be supporting this mainly because of the safety improvements that go with this. Obviously, the Queen's Drive area is a huge issue. It has been for a long time. I do agree with the Mayor to the extent that maybe we could have been looking to just remove one side of parking, but that hasn't been done. I also take your point, Mr. Chairman, that we're not really here to revisit what the hearings committee has already done. But I do have some huge concerns about the fact that we just seem to always be taking parking out, and we're not replacing it with any other parking. And I don't believe for a moment that because of the lack of parking, people aren't taking their cars to various places. I think they still are, and what we end up doing with taking these parks out is creating problems elsewhere. In particular, areas where there are sports played. And I know in the area that I live that on certain days, in particular weekends throughout the winter specifically, people are forced to park illegally, and they do. And there doesn't seem to be much done about that in terms of enforcement. And so I think areas where there are, especially at times, a large number of people wanting to park vehicles, we have to keep that in mind. And I think that just screwing it all down to the extent that we take parks out every time that we go through some sort of process like this is not beneficial in the long run. As I say, I will support this because I'm sure that the hearings committee have done due diligence in relation to what they were tasked to do, but I do still urge caution that going forward we can't just keep taking parks out. Thank you.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to focus on the process and to thank the staff for their work over a period of time through this process, and to the commissioners who sat on the hearings. It's not an easy task. You were tasked to look at all of the submissions, hear from people, consider the technical advice that our staff are asked to give. After all, they are the experts in this. I am not a traffic engineer, I just put that forward. I'm not aware of any others around the table, and I defer to that expertise. Where that lands doesn't always agree with our individual positions, but this is the process we follow. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for guiding the Hearings Committee through that process and where it landed, and I want to acknowledge the staff for their focus on safety, because that's what it's about, and also acknowledge their flexibility when there is a difficult area, as I mentioned, around carers and elderly folk, and also their focus on providing more mobility parks in the city.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, same. I would like to thank the councillors who sat on this committee. It is not an easy committee to sit on, I believe, given the controversy there is around parking in our city, and a lot of people aren't happy with it. Perhaps you're correct with some of the comments you made there before, Chair, about how many of us and many of the people in the public that have concerns about it should have come to those hearings, and I don't think enough people did come. I'm sure a lot of people did come, but I don't think enough came, because I do believe there are a lot of people who do have concerns about this. I'm particularly concerned about Albany Street. However, I don't think that's being covered in this as much, because it's going to be having the consultation done again. I know we're in speaking time now, not question time, but as I understand it, that's the case. So because I have got a lot of concerns, maybe I'll have to submit on the Albany Street myself. But certainly, as someone who drives up and down Albany Street most days, it's almost impossible to get a car park. And like one of the councillors mentioned before, I have a family member who can't see very well. He's legally blind. And so I need to get a park quite close to things that we're going to, so that it's easy for him to get in and out of the car and get to where he's going, because if he has to cross the road, and, it's a big issue. But I am fully in support of cycleways around our city, i.e. I think the harbour cycleway is fantastic. However, I do have a real concern about digging up streets that we use for every day, for going to businesses, for going to the university library, for example.
Given that Albany Street's not on the considerations, can we just make sure you're talking to the point directly, please, Councillor?
Sports grounds. So the Albany Street you're saying is not, that's what I thought. It's not part of it, but so that will come up, and I'll plan a submission for that. But I agree with what Councillor Ackland said before, and this is not, I believe the Oval is not covered in here either. I think that was done previously. I might be wrong, but I think I'm correct in saying that. But just to give an example, and perhaps I shouldn't admit it here, but I've parked on the grass at the Oval before when the kids were playing football, because we couldn't get a park anywhere. And it is almost impossible to get parks around the sports grounds. So while in an ideal world, everybody will get a bus to a sporting event, but that's not realistic when you've got, often the times don't meet the game time, and you've got to get yourself, the kids, all their gear. It's actually not that easy to do that. So I know a lot of people say, oh, well, use public transport. Our public transport doesn't offer the service we need. It's not regular enough. And
Councillor,
it
I really
doesn't
do
go
need you
to
to be
unusual
very
places.
specific on your speech to the actual items in front of us. This is
Yeah,
not
so,
a general review of public transport or transport in the city.
No, but it is connected. But thank you. Yes, the reason I raised it is that you need better public transport if you're going to cut out a lot of parks. And I am also concerned about the number of parks being cut out when we haven't got a world-class public transport service. Thank you.
Councillor Van.
In my view, the submission process which the councillors are obliged to go through is broken. In my view, the culture at the DCC, especially over the last 5 years, has been a car cancelling culture and a parking...
Point of order, Mr Chair.
Councillor Gary's point of order, there is a few, but I think they're all the same. Councillor, this was a due process that was performed, and it was done, I believe, and certainly I was the chair of the committee in a professional manner.
Can you please rule on the point of order?
I'm getting to the...
I don't want to sit through a lecture from you, if you don't mind.
Point of order, disrespect
well,
to the
that's now
chair.
Disrespect for the chair. I'm not going to bother with that point of order. It's not much point. You said car cancelling culture. That is predetermination, and that is quite an insult to give to the committee. So I am, as the committee chair, saying, stop using that language. That is unprofessional, and it is completely against what that committee did. So I am upholding the point of order.
If I'm not able to give my view here, and I did preface the phrase that you don't like with, in my view, then there's really no point me being here.
It is quite true that under our standing orders and our code of conduct, we have a mode of behaviour that we must hold by, and saying in front of an offensive statement, in my view, is not actually a mechanism of absolving yourself from the behaviour or the action. So, you can say in my view as many times as you want. If you keep coming up with car cancelling culture in the middle of what is a due process, then you are way out of line.
Thank you for your opinion.
Now I am the chair, so thank you for your silence. So Lucas.
Thank you. Having sat on this committee and as a mother of boys who've attended Otago Boys High School, I'm very aware of the issues in respect of the parking that we're looking at, and probably had a very informed view because it's a high topic of conversation about parking around Otago Boys High School. And there is a hierarchy of parking when you get your restricted driver's licence that I'm very aware of, and where you are supposed to park and where you're not supposed to park. And I'm also very aware that when these boys get their restricted their licence, they are not particularly good parkers. So that does add to the challenge of that area because they just literally stop often. And so the comment about possibly looking at angle parking may help some of the issues of parking in this area. But we did definitely address during the hearing about removing those parks and the pushing the issue away because, you know, when somebody gets their driver's licence, they just want to be able to drive. And, as the year progresses, more boys get their licence and there is more parking issues. We definitely canvassed the topic about allowing more parking. And the other issue, in particular to Councillor Ackland's point, and I raise it at every hearing, is about we keep removing parks, and I look for how we can remove less parks, how we can add parks. So I'm there advocating for parking. It definitely comes up all the time in air, and it's front and centre about, addressing the need for parking.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, just on the back of what Councillor Gary said, I've been on these hearing committees before, so I just want to again put on record the thanks to those people who sit on the hearings committees. I don't know about anybody else around this table, but I trust the hearings committees to take on board the data and evidence presented by our very, very trustworthy and professional staff for them to cogitate over that and come to the relevant decisions. So I will and always will support around this table the decisions of those hearings committees.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Just briefly, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your ruling earlier. I think it's important that we deal with this issue because of the dog whistling that goes on around it on the basis of fact. And I draw people's attention once again for the 17th time to the M.R. Cagney report, consultants who were bought and paid for by this council to study the issues around parking in the inner city. That report is still on the website. It's really easy to find. Look up parking roadmap. And I think the community should appreciate that we are basing these decisions on fact. Parking is always going to be a moving feast because of different demands, greater need for disability parking, emergency access, the sort of things that the hearing process is deputed to deal with, as well as social change. And I think we need to be very cautious when we start attempting to interfere with that process. And I think it's absolutely essential that we base any comments that are made on this issue on factual positions, reference the report I mentioned again, and also on the decisions that are made by the committee.
Any other speakers? I just want to say that, firstly, a lot of the changes that are brought about at these hearings, well, firstly, let's go back to the right front. We used to be able to fast track this stuff, I would like to point out. And in fact, it was a court hearing about 7 or 8 years ago that turned this into the consultation process that it is now. Otherwise, it used to be that staff recommended the parking changes and they pretty much came to us and went straight through. Good old-fashioned fast tracking, straight to the minister. Not all the changes that go in here are removal of car parks. A lot of them, especially in the centre of town, are changing the time of a car park, and they've often come actually at the request of the business to remove an 8-hour car park and turn it to a 1 hour or 30-minute, and it's relative to what is actually going on in that street. What are all the users in that street doing? Some of the other ones are sightline restrictions brought to us by Waka Kotahi rules. So if you're within so many metres of a corner and you don't have the sight lines, it gets yellow lines on it. And yes, in the past it didn't have yellow lines on it. And yes, in the past there were cars parked there. But there also were accidents at those intersections because your sight lines weren't good enough. So we are operating in an environment where there are a series of outside influences and our own internal decisions of where we want to go based on council decisions, and staff come together putting all of that together with the recommendations that go to the committee. That then goes out as a public consultation document. People then respond to that document. Now we may say not enough people see it, but generally speaking, Otago Boys parking would be a good idea. It becomes pretty well known that there are changes afoot, and you get your hearing, you get your response at the hearing at the time, and then the committee balances that up. If a decision made by the committee has come to here that you don't agree with, then my recommendation is that you go back to the city and you say, in the next round of parking changes, I want this decision to be reconsidered, and I want it to be reconsidered under these points. With that, I put it, all those in favour? All those against? Carried. Rather like item 10, so if your questions are generic, I would suggest that you've already asked them. But anyway, I'll take questions on item 11. Mr. Mayor.
Yes. I have a fresh question to do with disability parking. And where there are 2 disability parks end to end, I noted in the street yesterday when I was in George Street, where that situation exists already in the farmers block, there is a line across the middle designating the 2 different parks. However, it would be my observation that, or it is my observation that those parks are very large and designed for a large mobility vehicle to park there. However, yesterday there were 2 quite small cars parked there, and in fact 4 cars could have fitted in that space. And so my question is it feasible to designate the same size space for mobility parking, but leave the line separating it into 2 halves out, so that, because there were 2 mobility cars parked there, that way you could fit, say, 3 very easily in the same space. And so my point being to make better use of the available space, because sometimes there might be a group of people with mobility cars that turn up for some occasion. And, you know, it seems a waste of space to have 2 small cars when 4 small cars could fit, or certainly 3 cars, 3 medium-sized or normal, typical saloon-sized cars, 4-door saloon-sized cars could have fitted easily as well. is that feasible to leave the line out?
Oh, I'll have to come back to you on that, I'm afraid.
Any other questions? Councillor Gary.
This is a very specific question, but with a generic application. Page 96 talks about the bus stop connected with the Peninsula Connection project and the consultation. When you're doing that consultation, do you use the local networks to do that? Because I'm sure in every community there's just for example, a Facebook page, an email, database, a newsletter, whatever. Do we use those mechanisms, Mr. Spears?
Where there's community board, we tend to use the community board. In this case, the bus stop came out of the Peninsula project, and there was an opportunity identified, and the project people spoke with the residents nearby who thought it was good.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember the consultation. Thank you. I was just surprised that when there was zeros there, but now I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, then I'm going to put it that the committee adopts proposed changes to parking and traffic restrictions.
Sorry, no, we were speaking.
Once I'll put it and then look, speak.
No, you got to move.
Oh, sorry, I'm moving. It's getting past my lunchtime. I move that the committee adopts. You can second it. Yeah. I move that the committee adopts proposed changes to parking and traffic restrictions shown in the March 24 update of the Dunedin City Traffic and Planning Restrictions database, shown on the two links. And notes B notes the hearings committee has considered feedback from consultation on the proposed changes to parking restrictions, and C notes that all parking restrictions previously approved by the council remain unchanged. And it's seconded by Councillor Gary. Any speakers? Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I want to take the opportunity to once again just acknowledge the considerable work and the work of the committee, but I did want to focus on disability parking, and I want to say that I'm aware that sometimes there is pushback from the community who seem to forget that disabled people are customers too, and I find that reprehensible, frankly. But what I want to say to staff is I thank you for your considerable efforts over a very long period of time. It is evident in the changes being made that you take into account the need for disability parking in the city, to increase that responds to the requests that have been made. And I remind people that often disabilities are unseen. It's not necessarily somebody in a wheelchair, but there are all kinds of disabilities. So I really want to thank our staff for the work done in this area. I've noticed the trajectory over a number of years, and it is hugely appreciated by the disability community.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I just follow up on Councillor Gary's statement about disability people are customers too. I can assure you that in fact that question is asked by the panel at the time. Okay, so I put it. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 12, naming of 2 public roads and 1 private way. Councillor Gilbert, then Mr. Mayor.
Mine is of a far more generic nature, and it's for whomever in the room wishes to answer it. Given that the DCC road naming policy provides, as it says here, the framework for timely and consistent naming of roads that reflect the identity of the local community, I just wonder why it doesn't. This seems like a management kind of a thing rather than a governance kind of a thing. So it's always struck me as a bit odd that road naming turns up here. Can somebody clarify for me, please?
Clear, it's probably statutory.
Sorry?
Need your mics.
It's an elected member governance decision described in the Local Government Act.
So in the situations where it's had to go out to a community board who are elected, does it then, as it appears to, have to come to us?
It does. It seeks the local board's recommendation, which then gets reflected in the staff report, either in writing or verbally, to the committee.
Lovely. And that's all right. That's a national instruction rather than local.
It's in the Local Government Act.
It's in the Local Government Act. For councils that have community boards, yes, it does go to the local community board.
Can they?
if I may, Mr. Chairman, it's probably a good segue. So the Otago Peninsula Community Board met on the 18th of April and considered this, and they support the names Ocean Grove Drive, Kingfisher Place and Teal Lane, just for your information.
Mr. Mayor.
The only reason it appears to me, the only reason why Ocean Heights was not preferred is because that's the name of the developer's company doing this development. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the commercial name of the development.
But once it's there's no other company around. I presume that there's no other company around called Ocean Heights, is there? There's not Ocean Heights Shopping something or other or any such thing like that?
No, I don't think we can answer that. Sorry.
Not to my knowledge. You may have some knowledge of such a thing existing. However, so it seems to me that it's the name. You know, the rule is to stop a commercial advantage from accruing to some company that may have been involved with the making of the building of the subdivision, you know, into the future. Does that make sense? So in this case, it's only the name of the subdivision is the name asked for the road, Ocean Heights Drive. So it seems to me it's a very practical and sensible thing to use the name that has been asked for by the developer in this case, because there's no commercial advantage accruing to any other external company. It's only association with the name, and all the people that have purchased sections on that road do know it as Ocean Heights. So it seems to have good connection, and it has the view out, presumably, I haven't been there, presumably out over the sand dunes to the water beyond. Whereas Ocean Grove is a general name for the area, and a lot of people would drive through Ocean Grove, and that name encompasses the whole of the area rather than just this road. So it seems to me that it would be perfectly reasonable to allow Ocean Heights Drive in this situation. Was there any particular objection to that?
I think that's a matter for the committee to decide. Yes.
What I mean is, have you heard any particular objection from anyone to use of the name Ocean Heights Drive?
So in the policy, developers are required to give us a preferred name and an alternative name, both of which are meant to be acceptable. In this particular instance, we're not overly concerned with either name. It's just the one that meets the policy more clearly is the Ocean Grove Drive.
Mr. Chairman, so how would I propose that Ocean Heights Drive, that we change our, I'd like to amend our resolution that it's Ocean Heights Drive is used, rather than Ocean Grove Drive.
If you just give us, we'll just have a quick adjournment to figure out how to put that in. It'll have to go in at the.
That's fine.
But I just want to hear from staff.
It's I believe it's option 2.
Yeah, I'm just having a look now because I wasn't.
Someone will just move option 2.
So you just have to move. You have to just have a quick look at. Just tell me what we're going to say here.
Option 2, committee.
So, to be honest, I didn't read the options. I just read the paper. Okay. So I'd like to.
Are you?
Yes, I'd like to foreshadow that I'll move option 2.
Okay. Any more questions, Councillor Mayhem?
Along the line of options, I see naming Kingfisher Place as 16 characters long, which is, more than 15 characters, the recommendation. I'm wondering why we don't name it Koteri Place, which is the Māori name for Kingfisher, and the name Teal Lane, referring to the grey-teal duck. Well, there must be a Māori name for a grey-teal duck as well, and I'm surprised that the residents of the peninsula didn't want a correct name. Kingfisher sounds very Pākehā, and Kotari is a shortened version of the name. We'd be educating people what the name Kingfisher actually is.
Staff went back to the developer and suggested that, but the developer wanted to continue with these names.
I also think that, you know, while we have a certain amount of leeway, we just can't just come up with brand new names, even if they are related. Even if, yeah. Well, that's my answer. Councillor Lofiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair. Councillor Mayhem's question is sort of the basis of my question, which there have been several times at which councillors have asked in terms of the naming policy when there are going to be changes where women's names and kaitahu names have to be mandatory. And I just recall back in the day when a developer wanted Wakefield Wind or whatever, we did rule against that. However, the developer still has put up a Wakefield Wine sign around that development in Mosgiel. So, I mean, even though the council makes rulings, developers seem to try and get their own way anyway.
Cool. It's still sentence. Still question.
Can I just question Councillor Lofiso on that, because I drive past it's the new subdivision on School Road in Mosgiel, and I'm sure only the part of the new subdivision that the road is formed is named, because there was two names at our last meeting and we only approved one and asked the developer, and it's actually in the forward work program, to go back to and come back to us, and the second road in that development actually isn't even formed yet, so they haven't actually named that second part. I just need to thank you. Correct that.
Wakefield Wind.
Yeah, I remember that debate.
Yeah.
Any more? Okay.
So my question is, when we've asked questions about the changes to the actual policy, people, the response is it's happening, but not yet. When is it going to happen?
Okay, that's the question for staff. Yeah, that is the question, right, for staff. What's the process? Where's the progress been on the road names and updating the policy?
So that paper's been drafted and will come to potentially the next Infrastructure Services Committee meeting.
I might suggest that when you get it into a very formal, finalised form of the draft, as you saw what we have with the submission today, that you run that past councillors so they have an eye on it before it comes to the meeting, because it's not a good place to do editing. Thank you. Councillor Gary.
A question you may not be able to answer, but I'll try asking it. What are the consequences of not following the policy unless there's really good reason to do so?
You can go outside the policy at times. It depends what you're proposing. The names have to be acceptable to LINs. So, if the name is too long, or if the name breaches a policy that an emergency vehicle could get confused, we wouldn't accept it. But the policy is predominantly guidelines.
And how long has the policy been in place? Can anyone answer that for me?
I think it's 2016.
Thank you.
If that's the end of questions, then Mr Mayor is moving option 2. Yes. Do I have a second up? Councillor Ackland, speak to it.
Thank you. I think it's such a very small change here, and particularly because I'm someone that does frequent that area. I go through Tomahawk quite a lot, and it's always been Tomahawk and then Ocean Grove area. I consider that whole area to be Ocean Grove, so calling it Ocean Grove Drive, the drive would be, to me, a suitable name for the road right through the centre of the area, but that already has a name. So it's appropriate that Ocean Heights, to differentiate it, because it does go up to a particular height and provide an overview of the area. It seems an appropriate name and a logical name for that driveway, and it would make it easier for people going to visit someone they knew in the area looking for it. It makes logical sense to go and when they're looking for the name, it would contribute to the ease of finding the address. So that's why I'm plugging for option 2.
Any other speakers? Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just looking up Ocean Heights. I think we've got to be aware of precedent here, and I think calling this after the actual subdivision name is a mistake in this particular case. I think there are occasions when working outside, making decisions outside of the policy are appropriate. I don't think this is one of them. I think this opens a floodgate, frankly, and I don't think it's appropriate at all.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that point. I mean, I'm generally, I believe we have a policy for a reason. It is, I mean, we've been around here a long time. It is slightly malleable, but I think Councillor Gary hits on a pertinent point here, that it does set a bar in terms of precedent, and I worry that in the future we're going to be looking at defending or denying an application, for example, for GJ Gardner Street or Signature Drive or whatever. I think we're going down a road here that is, excuse the pun, that is probably a wee bit we have to be wary of. I won't support this.
Councillor Lucas.
I'd just like to make a point that the developer is actually Willow Ridge Developments. It's the name of the subdivision is Ocean Heights. Just to clarify that. Just didn't know. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Any other speakers? My feeling is sort of more like the mayor's, and I was interested in the staff response to say that they were not actually adamant about this decision. They were kind of 50-50 on it. And I guess so I think what we're dealing with here is that neither answer is perfect. One would be breaching the recommendation or the rule around naming a developer in the street, but the other one would be giving a name that has no confusion at all. And given that Ocean Grove is where it is, Ocean Grove Drive might be better named Ocean Heights Drive based on just description as to where the road is. So I have a feeling that it's a 50-50 call, to be honest, which I think is where the staff landed. I will put it, anybody else want to speak? You have the right of reply, but my intention will be to put it by division.
Yeah, and I think, there's a case of splitting hairs here, but for the primary or the previous reason as mentioned that the Chair agrees with, but also that there is no commercial sensitivity, there's no commercial tie-in to any existing company anywhere else, and it's just merely the name of the subdivision itself. So I think it's an inadvertent thing really, but it's a natural thing to want to call the subdivision after the road. He probably had that in mind the whole way through, so it might have been inadvertently that he didn't realise that there was a bylaw to prevent a commercial name being used for a street name. So I don't see that there's any commercial sensitivity there. But also there were no objections, so I was careful to ask staff if there'd been any objections. There's been no objections from anyone on the Peninsula Community Board or any other, neighbours or people involved. And I think it's just a common sense thing to have that association with the subdivision that exists and the name accordingly. So, there's not a contravention of any of any great importance. I mean, if we're going to have then any departure from the rules, then two of the names would not be suitable, so we might as well throw the whole thing out and we go back to the drawing board. And I think, to exercise, this degree of pedanticness about the choice of the name when the developers put all the effort in and made it happen, I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to allow that name of choice that is more appropriate to the locality and to the view and to where it sits in the wider area of Ocean Grove.
I'm sure he didn't mean to call us pedantic, but we're ready to go for the vote. We'll vote by division, please.
Councillor Ackland?
Aye.
Councillor Benson Pope?
Aye.
Sorry?
Aye.
Councillor Gary?
No.
Councillor Gilbert?
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan?
Aye.
Councillor Lefiso?
No.
Councillor Lucas?
Aye.
Ms MacDonald? Councillor Mayhew?
No.
Mayor Raddick?
Aye.
Councillor Walker?
Sorry, I'm so used to coming after Councillor Vandervis. No.
Councillor Weatherall?
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley?
Aye.
Carried 9-4.
And that brings us on to item 13, consideration for the chair. I know Councillor Benson Pope told me at the head of the meeting he has an item.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask you to consider asking for either an audit or a report on heavy vehicle safety in the city. We're all only too aware of what transpired outside in the weekend and the potential for a major injury, death event and such an event. I'd like to remind councillors this is the second occasion on Stewart Street where a contract pumping truck for us used the old Polytech building to stop, which might have been a sensible alternative at the time, but was also fraught with risk. And that's not the Stewart Street isn't the only street in the city with no run out. We know that Pine Hill has always caused some concerns to Whakatahi, but at least there's a run out at the bottom. And while it's not perfect, there's a run out down from Lookout Point. Hope you're not stopped at the lights at Barnes Drive. But Stewart Street is really problematic because it leads directly into a major population concentration, as does London Street, actually, at the Frederick Street corner. And I'm not making any comment about what might have happened, but heavy vehicles do have mechanical problems at times. And I think I'd like us to have more information about the routes that such vehicles are using. Why Pioneer want to go that way is a bit beyond me. It's certainly not ideal, as has just been demonstrated. But I think there's a wider question around a couple of our inner city hills where an out-of-control vehicle would do terrible damage to people as well as property. And I'd like you to think about coming back, asking staff for an appropriate assessment of what capacity we have to provide guidance or require routes that would be safer either around or through the city. We have spent considerable money on the harbour bypass, which will suit a lot of vehicles, but I'd like the whole question looked at by our expert transportation planners so that we can do something if we choose to on the basis of some facts.
Just clarifying, I think it's a good request in terms of, I think it's something that we are interested in. Are you wanting heavy vehicle movements, or are you wanting also potentially identification of streets that are not really suitable for heavy vehicles, for if they lose control, we have nothing to protect us once it happens? A bit of both. Okay. Do you got the rough idea of that?
Can I just add something to that, and something I've brought to the attention of Ms Benson on occasions. I wonder if we could include in that Burlington Street. I've experienced going up Burlington Street with heavy articulated vehicles trying to turn in and down, and that is a frightening proposition, and it's happened more than once, and so it would be good to perhaps include that as well.
Well, I think in that, yes, I think I saw her nodding when you said that. I'd go all the way to the whole length of 3 Mile Hill too, as well as just Stewart Street, because that has real relevance when we think about other stuff we've been discussing today. So Pioneer is on the top of 3 Mile Hill, so I pretty much know why they go down Stewart Street. But maybe after the weekend we might want to ask them, do you really have to go down Stewart Street? Yeah. Thank you. Any other items for consideration for the chair? Then I can't believe it's got as late as it was. I really did think we'd be done by lunchtime. Yeah, it's still lunchtime. Oh, Councillor Houlihan, do you have a question? Did you have a consideration for the chair?
No, I don't. I just had a comment around Councillor Benson Pope's consideration for the chair. I also think it has merit. However, given some of the meetings I've been at in the past, I'm just concerned at what type of cost a report like that would be, because that's quite a wide scope, and I
I'll work with Transport to try to achieve Councillor Benson Pope's objective cost
I
effectively.
support the merit of it. I don't want it to come back and be a huge cost. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And in closing this meeting, I'll ask Ms McDonald to give us a closing karakia, please.
Kia ora, me inoa tātou, kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō mata āregi, o ihu karaiti, ko te aroha te atua me te whiwhinga tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu aki. Amen.
Thank you. And with that, I close the meeting at 1:10 past. Thank you.